In 1861, President Abraham Lincoln created the Uinta and Ouray Indian Reservation in present-day Uinta County, Utah. All of the Utes living in the Uinta Basin, as well as others from Wyoming and Colorado, were moved to the new reservation. Conflict erupted between the Utah Utes and the Colorado Utes, and to keep the peace, the U.S. Army commissioned the construction of a fort in the region. Fort Duchesne, as it was called, proved so useful that it replaced many of the smaller forts in nearby states. Conflict still existed, however, between the Utes and the white settlers. Many settlers were grazing cattle illegally on the reservation, and a few people panned for gold in the creeks. Hostilities were often threatened by the individual tribe members. It was only through the efforts of the tribal leaders and the soldiers at Fort Duchesne that hostilities were avoided. In 1888, however, the discovery of a mineral called gilsonite would spell trouble for the reservation. And little did even the miners know it would spell trouble for the entire county. Gilsonite is a very rare mineral that has only been found in Utah and Colorado. It was discovered in the 1860s, but it was initially deemed worthless. In 1885, a man by the name of Samuel Gilson, after whom gilsonite is named, discovered a promising vein of the mineral in Uinta County. After performing experiments to test what the mineral could be used for, Gilson discovered that it could be used in a variety of ways. He tried to stake an official claim in 1888, but county surveyors discovered that his mine was on land owned by the Utes. He couldn't stake a mining claim as long as the land belonged to them. This didn't stop Gilson from promoting his find. He went to Park City, a prominent mining town, and rallied the support of several influential mine owners. Gilson and the Park City miners staked an area consisting of 7,040 acres of land and opened a case with the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau told them that they couldn't take any action themselves, but if they could get the soldiers of Fort Duchesne and the Ute tribal leaders to sign a treaty signing off the land, it would be theirs. With this new development, Gilson wrote a treaty and presented it to the commanding officers of Fort Duchesne. 5 high-ranking soldiers wrote and signed individual affidavits labeling the mining ground as utterly worthless for any purposes to the tribes. As a part of the treaty, Gilson would be paying $20 per acre for the land, a total of $140,800 for the entire thing. Unable to afford the price alone, Gilson's partners from Park City invested their own money into the mining venture. The only thing that stood in the way now was the Ute tribe. Upon hearing of Gilson's efforts, the Ute leaders refused to meet with him. They hoped to discourage him from purchasing the land. The soldiers at Fort Duchesne recommended that Gilson bribe the Utes with whiskey. Though an 1832 law had banned the sale of alcohol to Native Americans, the alcohol was purchased for a planned army patrol and was to be given to the Utes for free. This plan was presented to the Ute leaders, and they finally agreed to meet with Gilson to sign the treaty. In September of 1888, the Army set up camp at the entrance to Gilson's proposed mine. The treaty signing would take place at this location so that the Utes could see the land that they were signing away. Wagons filled with whiskey were brought to the event. Small cups of whiskey slightly larger than a single shot were passed to each Ute that signed the treaty. By the second day, the treaty had enough signatures to validate it. With an excess of whiskey left, the remainder was given to the tribe, and the signed treaty was forwarded to Washington, D.C. for ratification. On June 22, 1888, the land was declared to be a part of the public domain, set aside for mining purposes only. When a new mining enterprise is begun, it's typical for a town or a group of towns associated with the mining enterprise to be established. It only seemed to make sense that a town develop around the gilsonite mine. This town was established illegally on the land annexed by the federal government. Being located on public domain land, the town was not subject to any local law jurisdiction, whether that be county or reservation. Not even the soldiers at Fort Duchesne could enforce laws there. The federal government was the only body with any kind of jurisdiction, but while in town, it could only enforce laws broken there. It couldn't enforce laws broken in other states or even in Utah, because the land was public domain. This made the town a hotbed for outlaw activity, especially because it was located on the infamous Outlaw Trail, which led from Brown's Hole in Wyoming to Robber's Roost in southeastern Utah. Outlaws passed through the town on a regular basis, and being free from local law and practically immune to federal law, these outlaws often stayed in town for some time. Most of the outlaws who holed up here were fleeing federal law enforcement and agents from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. All kinds of vice did a good business in town. The settlement had no official name, as it was never recognized as a legal city. Local residents gave the town the ironic name of Sober Town, but to most it was simply known as the Strip, named for the strip of land it was located on. Notorious outlaw Butch Cassidy spent some of his earlier years in town. One of Cassidy's associates, Elsie Lay, ran a saloon that doubled as a counterfeiting operation. The lesser-known Red Sash gang, which terrified ranchers in Wyoming, also spent some time here hiding from law enforcement. Despite all the outlaws that ran through town, the main patrons to the places of ill repute were soldiers from Fort Duchesne and Utes from the reservation. Soldiers would often sneak away from the fort at night, remove their shoes, swim across the Uinta River, and cavort with women and hang out with outlaws at the Strip. Efforts by commanding officers and the acting Indian agent from the reservation failed to prevent the soldiers from spending time in town. The Utes were illegally sold alcohol in town and would often be seen wandering drunkenly around the town and even in their reservation. Tribal leaders attempted to work with the commanders at Fort Duchesne to try and put a stop to this vice, but the fact remained that there was almost nothing they could do to stop it. Deadly gunfights, knife fights, and bar brawls were almost a daily occurrence at the Strip. Federal marshals officially investigated 16 murders in the town, but many others went unreported and/or ignored. The reservation's agent, James Randlett, called it the dirtiest community I have ever known in 30 years' experience in frontier service. In 1892, Randlett turned to Congress for help, but his pleas and those of the commanding officers at Fort Duchesne went unanswered. Congress seemed almost ashamed that their ratification of the treaty had led to the establishment of a town as bad as the Strip. The Strip maintained a sour reputation for almost 2 decades. The residents of other Uinta County settlements kept pushing for law enforcement on the Strip, but federal authorities and Fort Duchesne officers continued to pass the buck, and nothing sufficient was done. The state legislature passed a law which specifically made selling alcohol to any person illegal if the saloon was located near a reservation. This law excluded incorporated settlements, which made it effective only on the Strip, but the law didn't make much of a difference since most of the businessmen in town were lawbreakers anyway. Efforts were made to make the Strip a part of Fort Duchesne so that the commanding officers would have more control. Despite all of these attempts, the Strip pushed forward. In 1905, the Uinta and Ouray Reservation was opened for settlement, thus placing the Strip under the jurisdiction of local law enforcement. Uinta County Sheriff John T. Pope wasted no time and rode into town, hanging up signs telling people to get out or be killed. Pope returned a few days later with a large posse consisting of local, state, and federal authorities. Thankfully, no blood was shed, and all outlaws were transported out of town in wagons that the posse had brought along with them. Attempts to resettle the Strip and restore it to its former condition were made on several occasions. Each one failed. A few legitimate businessmen remained in town until Fort Duchesne closed in 1912. Then even these men left, and the area was homesteaded by a rancher. The rancher used the abandoned buildings in town to build his ranch, and it's alleged that he found several buildings with bullet holes and even found dry blood on some of the floorboards. Over 100 years has passed since the last Ute stumbled drunkenly out of a saloon. Over 100 years has passed since Butch Cassidy and Elsie Lay chatted civilly with soldiers. Almost no trace of Utah's last Wild West town exists today. A road in the town of Gusher, a town established as the Strip was on its dying bed, leads south to the site of the old community. Some say if you listen closely, the wind still carries the sounds of honky-tonk pianos, the chatter of outlaws bragging about the crimes they've committed, and the retort of guns going off in fights to the death.